Val Kilmer's death shocked the world, but fans weren't ready for what they found out afterward. While Hollywood mourned the loss of one of its biggest stars, an unsettling document came to light: Kilmer's autopsy report. Buried inside were details so shocking that they made everyone wonder what really happened in his last days. This isn't the story that the headlines told you, it's the truth that was quietly hidden behind the tributes and movie montages. Stay tuned for the shocking last chapter of the report. Hollywood mourns the shocking death of Val Kilmer on April 1, 2025. The news hit Hollywood and the rest of the world like a punch in the gut. Kilmer had died. He was 65 years old and was best known for his roles in Top Gun, Batman Forever, and The Doors. According to the official statement, he died of complications from pneumonia. But as tributes poured in on social media and fans paid their respects, something felt missing from the story. Director Michael Mann, who worked with Kilmer on Heat, called him a brilliant, unpredictable force who left an indelible mark on every scene he touched. Josh Brolin shared a heartfelt message that said, "See you pal, I'm going to miss you. You were a brave, creative firecracker." Even the official Top Gun account mourned the death of their beloved Iceman, writing, "A legend on and off-screen, Val Kilmer, you'll be missed." Actors, filmmakers, and musicians all added their voices to the chorus of grief. A black-and-white picture of Kilmer as Doc Holliday in Tombstone, while director Francis Ford Coppola remembered him as a natural talent that grew stronger with age. Some messages were long, some were short, but they all had the same shock, sadness, and a sense that this loss came too soon. But beyond the flowers, statements, and media retrospectives, there were rumors that people had known Val Kilmer was sick for years. He fought a long, public battle with throat cancer, which he finally told everyone about in. Fans watched him lose his voice, struggle to breathe, and fade from view until one last powerful appearance in Top Gun, Maverick in 2017. Even then, when he came back to the screen with the help of voice AI and creative filmmaking, many felt it was a farewell. When the news of his death came out, most people thought it was the long-term damage from his cancer treatment that finally caught up with him. Pneumonia in a weak body wasn't surprising. What was surprising was what? In the days after Kilmer's death, tributes kept coming in and the media played endless highlight reels of his best roles. But behind closed doors, close friends, former co-workers, and even family members started admitting that they hadn't known how bad things really were. Several of them hinted that Kilmer had been pulling away more and more in the months before his death, ignoring calls, turning down visitors, and turning down offers of help. It wasn't. Before fans started asking why he hadn't been seen in public for months, why were there rumors that he'd been hospitalized several times in the last year without it ever making the news, and why was there a delay in releasing his full autopsy report even though the official cause of death was pneumonia? At first, these questions were lost in the flood of tributes, but a few reporters kept digging. There were rumors that the autopsy revealed disturbing details that went far beyond what anyone expected. That suggested Kilmer's last days may have been even darker than everyone knew. For now, though, the world mourned, fans watched their favorite Val Kilmer movies again, social media was full of old interviews, movie clips, and photos of Kilmer smiling in his prime, but behind the sadness, there was a quiet unease. While the headlines told us how he died, the real story, the one hidden in the fine print of his final medical report, was still waiting to be found. The Hollywood enigma: Val Kilmer's rise and reputation before the tributes and the headlines about his death before the questions about what the autopsy showed. Val Kilmer was something else entirely. He was a force of nature in Hollywood, a man who could light up the screen and disappear behind a character like few others, but he was also surrounded by rumors, friction, and mystery long before his death. Val Kilmer was born in Los Angeles in 1959. He was born in California and became the youngest person ever to be accepted into Juilliard's prestigious drama program. From there, it didn't take long for Hollywood to call. His big break came in Top Secret in 1984, a comedy that showed he could switch between being charming and crazy. But it was Top Gun in 1986 that made him famous as Tom "Iceman" Kazansky Kilmer, the cool, cocky rival who became the heart of the movie. Of the story. After that, his career took off, and he easily played roles like Jim Morrison in The Doors, a performance so convincing that even Morrison's bandmates were stunned, and Doc Holliday in Tombstone, where his performance as the Southern gunslinger became legendary. He also played Batman in Batman Forever, which was one of the highest-grossing movies of the 1990s, but that role came with its own problems. As his fame grew, so did rumors that Val Kilmer was difficult on set. Directors started calling him demanding. On the chaotic set of The Island of Dr. Moreau, Kilmer got into so many fights with the crew and other actors that one director quit. Joel Schumacher, who directed Kilmer in Batman Forever, said he was mentally ill and the hardest actor he'd ever worked with. Kilmer later said these claims were false, calling himself a perfectionist who wanted to dive deep into his roles and wasn't afraid to say what he thought, but the damage to his reputation was too great. In the early 2000s, he became less bankable, less visible, and quietly retreated from the front lines of Hollywood. But there was still something about Kilmer that made him so interesting. Even when the press called him a moody actor, directors kept casting him, and fans kept watching. There was always a sense that Kilmer was dealing with something much bigger than the roles he played. Then he got sick. When rumors started to spread around 2014 that his health was getting worse, he kept quiet. No one talked about Kilmer's weight loss, raspy voice, or cancelled shows for years, even though friends and fans could see that something was wrong. It wasn't until 2017 that Kilmer finally admitted he had been fighting throat cancer, a battle he had kept secret while quietly undergoing chemotherapy, radiation, and eventually a tracheotomy that took away his natural voice. Fans praised his honesty when he finally talked about it, and they praised his strength when he appeared in. When Kilmer came back as Iceman in Top Gun Maverick, the public saw him as weak but happy, and they saw it as a victory and a comeback moment. But the more you looked back at Kilmer's life, the more you realized how much he'd kept from the world. Yes, he had a career full of memorable roles, but he also kept years of tension, secrecy, and silence about what was really going on behind the scenes, and it wasn't just during his career. No one knew what was going on behind the scenes, not even his family and closest friends could have seen coming. He had to hide everything to protect his privacy at all costs, and it followed him through his career and his illness. The most upsetting part of his story wasn't in the tabloids or the interviews, it was what was found after he died. Kilmer had been fighting cancer in secret for years. Val Kilmer's public life looked like a highlight reel, with red carpets, blockbuster movies, and interviews where he flashed his famous smirk. But behind the headlines and the camera, Kilmer refused to talk about a battle that, by the time the world found out about it, had already cost him almost everything. It started quietly around 2014, when fans started to notice something different about him. He looked thinner and weaker, and his voice sounded rough and horsey. During public appearances, events were cancelled, reports of him being hospitalized were made, and blurry photos of him looking weak spread rumors that he was seriously sick, but Kilmer always denied it, saying he was fine even when he wasn't. In an interview with The Hollywood Reporter in 2017, Kilmer finally admitted what many people had already thought: he had been diagnosed with throat cancer. He had spent the past 3 years getting radiation therapy, chemotherapy, and a tracheotomy, which made it impossible for him to speak again. He played it down, as usual for Kilmer, by joking about his raspy voice and saying he was doing well, but the truth was more complicated. The treatments had saved his life, but they had taken almost 3 years. His once strong voice, which was heard in movies like The Doors and Tombstone, was now just a weak, breathy whisper. His health was weak, he had trouble breathing and eating, and he couldn't work like he used to. For someone who had spent decades in front of the camera, this was a private hell, but Kilmer didn't want sympathy. Instead, he tried to change the story. In 2021, he released a deeply personal documentary called Val. Made with the help of his children, the film used decades of voiceover narration and home video footage to tell his story from his childhood to his rise in Hollywood and finally his battle with cancer. It was raw, honest, and sometimes uncomfortable to watch. Audiences saw not the polished star but the fragile man behind the fame. For many fans, Val was a release, a chance to finally understand the man who had spent so long hiding behind characters and headlines. But there were things that even the documentary didn't show because Kilmer was already open about his illness. Some parts of his story he kept to himself, and even his doctors would later say they didn't fully understand. The headline said he had won the battle against cancer and was now in remission, living quietly in Los Angeles and focusing on his art, family, and small independent projects. But those closest to him knew that remission didn't mean he was safe. The tracheotomy had left him permanently vulnerable, his immune system was weak, he had trouble breathing, eating, and speaking every day. Aside from the physical damage, there were signs of something deeper going on: emotional isolation, withdrawal, and a growing reluctance to let anyone into his world. He wasn't the Val Kilmer that people remembered, and despite the positive news stories about his recovery, his health continued to slowly get worse. By the time his last months came around, even those closest to him admitted that he wasn't reaching out for help or letting anyone see how bad things had gotten. The battle was over when Kilmer beat cancer, but what the public and even people close to him didn't understand was that the battle left scars that went much deeper than anyone knew. Those scars would come back to the surface in the most disturbing way after he was gone. For fans who grew up watching Val Kilmer rule the big screen, his return in Top Gun: Maverick in 2022, almost 40 years after the original movie made him famous, felt like a moment frozen in time. And there he was, Tom "Iceman" Kazansky standing next to Tom Cruise's Maverick, but this time there was something different and fragile behind the cool exterior. By the time Maverick came out in theaters, everyone knew Kilmer's voice was permanently damaged, his battle with throat cancer was no longer a secret. What many people didn't know was how hard Cruise and Kilmer himself worked to get him back on screen at all. Kilmer's health was getting worse, and he couldn't speak. It was hard for him to do simple scenes properly, but he wanted to do it for himself and the fans. It was a chance to close the loop on a character that had shaped his career in many ways. The filmmakers used a variety of creative techniques to bring Iceman back to life. They used text messages to help the story and had Iceman talk by typing. When he finally spoke, it was only a few simple words, but they had weight because they weren't just coming from Iceman, they were also from Kilmer. What people heard in that scene wasn't entirely Kilmer's real voice, it was a mix of his real speech and cutting-edge AI voice technology. Kilmer had worked with a software company to digitally recreate his voice based on archival recordings. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to remind everyone of the voice they had missed when the movie first came out. Fans all over the world were moved to tears, and critics said it was one of the most emotional parts of the movie. It wasn't the dialogue, it was. It was about a man who had lost everything coming back for one last bow, but things weren't so polished off-screen. Those who worked on the movie later said how hard it had been because Kilmer's health was fragile and every day on set was hard. Scenes were carefully staged to make sure he didn't have to speak or move too much, and when the cameras stopped rolling, Kilmer would quietly leave, exhausted. After the movie came out, Kilmer did a few interviews and public appearances, but it was clear he was. As he became less well known, he spent most of his time at home with his kids and close friends, painting and writing. Fans thought they had seen the triumphant return of a legend, but what most people didn't realize was that Kilmer's performance in Maverick wasn't a comeback at all, it was a farewell. In many ways, Kilmer's performance in Maverick was a carefully planned goodbye. He gave the audience closure, but behind the scenes, his health was already getting worse. Fans were happy to see Iceman come back, but Kilmer quietly disappeared from public life again. The scene was emotional and heartbreaking for many, but it wasn't the whole story. No one watching that movie could have imagined that Kilmer's true final chapter wouldn't happen on the big screen, it would happen months after he was gone in a report that no one was ready to read. Kilmer's personal life, family, fame, and loneliness were revealed for all the headlines and the box office. Val Kilmer's personal life was rarely shown to the public. He was famous for decades, but the man behind the camera remained a mystery. As the years went by, that mystery only grew. Kilmer's love life, like much of his career, was a mix of intensity and turbulence. In 1988, at the height of his rising fame, he married Joanne Whalley, a British actress he met on the set of Willow. The two seemed like the perfect Hollywood couple, young, talented, and beautiful. They had 2 children together. Behind the scenes, the stresses of fame and personal problems took a toll on Kilmer and his wife, and by 1996, they were no longer married. Kilmer stayed close to his children. In interviews, he often said they were his greatest source of pride. They were in his documentary Val, and it was clear that they had become his emotional anchor after years of ups and downs in Hollywood. However, Kilmer's personal relationships were rocky over the years, outside of his role as a father. The tabloids loved the stories about his relationships with Cindy Crawford, Daryl Hannah, and even Angelina Jolie while he was filming Alexander. But Kilmer never confirmed or talked about these relationships. He kept his private life very private. In his later years, that privacy turned into isolation when he was diagnosed with cancer. His health problems forced him to withdraw from public life, but it wasn't just physically. His friends and family started to notice he was feeling down. Wasn't letting people in like he used to, invitations went unanswered and calls went unanswered. He spent long periods of time alone at home in Los Angeles, mostly with his art, journals, and memories. Some of this was understandable, since cancer and its treatments had left him physically and emotionally worn out. His voice was a whisper, and his body was weak. Public appearances were tiring, but even in private, Kilmer seemed to be closing himself off. In his own words, he called himself a deeply spiritual. He was a religious person who believed in symbols, signs, and the deeper meaning of life. But that faith also made him very protective of his space. He didn't want sympathy or to be seen as a victim. This protective instinct, however, cost him. In the last year of his life, friends said he became harder to reach. He stopped responding to messages and skipping parties, and some family members said they hadn't seen him in months before he died, and it looked like he was dead. People who knew him best were starting to wonder if he was really sick and struggling more than he let on. Were they hiding something? Or had all the fighting he did in Hollywood and with his health just worn him down? When the news of his death came out, those closest to him were devastated, but not completely surprised. They had seen the signs of his decline, the growing silence, and the physical toll. What they hadn't seen, though, was what the official report about his death would say. Buried beneath the tributes and news stories was a truth that no one saw coming, a truth that painted a much darker picture of Kilmer's last months. When that truth finally came out, it made even those closest to him wonder how well they really knew Val Kilmer at all. After Val Kilmer's death, the world grieved and moved on. His movies were streamed, his interviews were rewatched, and his Iceman legacy was celebrated. It felt like the story had ended, a beloved actor gone too soon after years of good health. When Val Kilmer's autopsy report came out, it confirmed what everyone already knew, that he had died of pneumonia in a body that was already weak. But deeper in the report were details that painted a much scarier picture. It wasn't the cause of death that shocked people, it was everything else. The coroner's report showed signs of severe malnutrition in Kilmer's last months. His weight had dropped well below what was considered normal. There were clear signs of muscle loss, which doctors said is common in people with terminal illnesses but was unusually advanced in this case. It made them wonder if he had stopped eating or given up. That wasn't all. There were also reports of multiple untreated infections that were minor at first but were left untreated for long enough to put more stress on his already weak immune system. The report says that these infections could have been easily treated if they had been found earlier. Even scarier were the notes about Kilmer's chronic surgical wounds that hadn't fully healed, some of which were from earlier cancer surgeries. There were also signs of ongoing physical stress and neglect, and the report said that in the months before his death, he had been refusing medical care and staying at home despite clear signs that he needed help. Finally, there were the toxicology results, which confirmed that Kilmer was high even though there were no signs of illegal drugs or overdose. There were low levels of prescription painkillers in his body, not enough to kill him, but enough to show he had been in a lot of pain that wasn't being managed. The official word in the report was clinical cold, but it was clear that Val Kilmer hadn't just died of pneumonia, he had been slowly losing his health and mental abilities for a lot longer than anyone knew. When the news broke, they all used the same phrase to describe the disturbing details found in Kilmer's autopsy report. They weren't exaggerating. What really shocked people wasn't that he had died, but how much he had suffered in silence and kept from everyone, his fans, his friends, and even his family. It seemed like Kilmer had spent his last months protecting his privacy at all costs, keeping the world from seeing his pain even when it was eating him alive. In the end, the autopsy showed more than just the cause of death, it showed the weight of what he carried alone and the struggles he never spoke about. That's the part of Val Kilmer's story that no one will ever forget, the quiet fall that no one saw coming. What do you think makes someone hide their pain so well that even their closest friends and family don't see it? Is it pride, privacy, or something much deeper?